All right, good afternoon, everybody. Happy Friday, and welcome back to another segment of Did You Know? I hope you guys are all having a fantastic day. I'm Adam with LAHC, and today's Did You Know topic is going to be on different kind of activities and things that somebody can do in lieu of substance use. That means instead of substance use. We're going to go ahead and dive right in. A lot of very good information on here. First, let's discuss the reasons why some people will turn to different substances. There's a lot of different reasons. Every single person is different in their own kind of personal situations that lead them to either experimenting with substances or maybe trying to run from their problems with substances. The main one is curiosity. I think a lot of people generally start because they're curious about what would happen if I were to use this substance. And I think most anti-drug programs fail to address this in youth. And so youth generally will get a lot of, hey, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, it's bad for you. But they don't really get a lot of information as to why, how does it make people feel good? Why do people like it so much? What's the draw to it? What is drawing people to it? And I think if we just talk about that a little bit, we can kind of calm some of that curiosity down, because it's okay to be curious about how a red velvet cake tastes, but to be curious about how a drug is going to affect you is a different ballgame, because now you're running a whole bunch of physical and mental risks that could come from using that substance. Most people either use substances to unwind. Maybe we're using something like a painkiller to avoid or deal with pain, or maybe even psychological pain. Cannabis specifically is touted for helping people kind of calm down if they're dealing with psychological pain. The reality of it, and this goes for any of these substances, is whether it's physical pain or even psychological pain. What if you're running from life? The reality is all of these substances are very good at numbing us to these things, but they're not really good at solving these problems. And so most people that you meet who are struggling with a substance use disorder still pretty much have the same problems they had when they started, but now maybe on one extreme they just don't care about the problems, or on the other extreme they're devastated by the problems and now they're dealing with a depression to the substance. It's a very, very stressful situation to get caught into, and that's why we do lives like this. So hopefully I still have some people paying attention. Some people will use drugs to help them perform better. This is common in high school, where students will use Adderall to help them study better or maybe focus better. And it's the same with other drugs. It's just giving you that momentary boost in focus and attention. But over time, that depletes, or it starts to drain your body's ability to do that on its own. And so you may think it's helping you perform better, but in the long run, it's actually chipping away at your ability to perform without it. The same is with caffeine and pre-workout drinks for working out. You can have your pre-workout drink, but chances are you won't be able to go to the gym without it anymore, because that's going to do the same thing, deplete your natural energy. And a third one, since we're talking about working out, anabolic steroids, pretty much the same thing. You're not only are you going to get a whole bunch of unpleasant and nasty physical side effects, but you're also depleting your body's ability to release testosterone and all the hormones that steroids give to help you build muscle. And so the same thing's going to happen. Your body won't be able to recover or build muscle without these steroids, these substances. Some people delve into things like drinking because it's a social activity. You go to a bar or a club or a tailgate party, and there's people drinking, having a beer, seemingly having a good time. And so this kind of starts unfortunately, a lot of instances of alcoholism, or people struggling with alcohol use disorder. Because it's very social, it's kind of viewed as this harmless social kind of thing that people do. And we kind of had that same perception with cigarettes maybe 15, 20 years ago, until we realized that they're actually killing us. And alcohol is doing the same thing, claiming a whole bunch of lives per year from drunk driving fatalities or domestic violence or maybe even overdosing. Lastly, and we saw this happen a lot during the pandemic, people will generally use to deal with boredom. If you don't have anything to do, there's this really nice quote that I like: a mind that has nothing to do wanders a lot. And for most people, our minds wander to what's the easiest way that I can feel good right now, or what's the easiest way that I can have fun right now. Although it's easy, but it's not exactly the safest way to have fun. Now, why or how do these drugs work? Our bodies have these hormones called happy hormones or neurotransmitters. And I'm sure you've heard of some of them: dopamine, serotonin, endorphins, oxytocin, and in some cases, adrenaline. And what happens is our brain normally releases these hormones when something good happens. So you take a test and you find out you passed it. Your body releases dopamine. You cook maybe a good meal. You cook a good meal for yourself and you eat it and it's delicious. And so your body releases dopamine, releases serotonin, releases all these hormones to kind of program your brain into seeking that behavior. So let's say you're exercising and you feel good. That's because your body's releasing dopamine. And what's going to happen is next time you're going to want to exercise to get that same feel good feeling, because that's what these hormones do. They kind of wire you to keep going back to that thing. And these hormones are very important because they also act as neurotransmitters. So they transmit, or they carry messages between different parts of our brain, telling it what to do, how to feel, how to act, or just to be okay. And this is also why with people who struggle with depression or anxiety or a mood disorder, you can find that the level of these hormones in their brain is usually imbalanced, or it's a little bit low. Now, what happens when we take a substance is it's going to trick our brain into releasing these happy hormones. And you may think, okay, what's the problem with this? It's just going to make us think that we feel okay. Well, it's releasing a very high amount of these happy hormones. Now, remember what I said about the caffeine and the anabolic steroids and all those substances. The more we do them, the more they deplete our body's ability to do that on its own. And so if we're relying on a joint or maybe Budweiser to help us feel better, over time we're actually going to start feeling worse and worse. And this is also why addiction happens. These hormones do prime our brain to seeking that behavior. And so if we have a drug releasing a lot of these hormones, chances are our brain's going to go, oh, I want to feel that way again. I need to seek this drug. And this is usually when addiction happens. And so obviously this feel-good feeling is going to keep prompting the user to continue using and continue taking the substance. And this is when the person develops a dependency. They feel like they need this drug, they need to get high, or they need to be drunk in order to feel okay. For most of us, these drugs are going to lead to poor decisions, bad experiences, some physical illness or physical harm, or mental illness, mental harm. And of course, you run the risk of addiction. And with most drugs, especially pain-killing drugs, from alcohol to Xanax to opioids, these things could potentially cause overdose, especially nowadays, because whatever source is giving these drugs out is lacing them with fentanyl, which is extremely powerful. A couple weeks ago, I did a video on that as well. And so really important to be careful, because these things are very real. And the chance of using substances, and this applies for everyone, the insanely high amounts of hormones that are released when we take these drugs is toxic to our body. And over time, it can start to break down our physical well-being. It can start to break down different organs in our body, and it can even take a toll on our mental health. And so we run the risks of short-term damage caused by these substances, and then we have long-term damage when we continue to use these substances frequently or daily. Our short-term risks are pretty, I don't want to say mild, but they're not as bad as the long-term risks. The short-term risk, of course, you get the memory loss of balance and consciousness that you would expect from somebody who's been using. The impulsive, impaired decision-making, nausea, vomiting, and constipation, these things are more common with alcohol and Adderall and things like that. Reproductive harm is common with most substances, including cannabis. If you didn't know that, look it up. Headaches, worsened mental health, especially worsened mental health, because those happy hormones we talked about before are especially important if you are dealing with depression or anxiety, because the levels are low, and the last thing you want to do is take something from a very low level to a very high level with a substance, with a drug. That's going to be a very bad contrast, and that's usually, it messes the body up, it messes the brain up, and that exacerbates or makes the mental illness worse. And then, of course, addiction is a short-term and a long-term risk. Just because you use the first 2 or 3 times and, oh, I'm not addicted yet. Well, there's a pretty good chance after the 5th time you could eventually get to a point where you're like, oh, I feel like I need this drug even though I don't need it. So those are the short-term risks, and then long-term risks are more in-depth. And so you get the short and long-term memory loss. Most of these drugs are going to potentially wipe your memory the more that you do them. You also deal with more mental health complications, different physical symptoms like stroke or brain damage, liver failure, heart failure. These are things that also happen as a result of your body trying to process these drugs, especially our liver, since it's responsible for processing everything that we consume. So liver damage is the first, stroke and heart failure will be second in line. Overdose and death is a lot more common than it should be, unfortunately. Social problems and financial problems are huge, and these are things that we don't really think about as much because we're kind of thinking of all the unhealthy physical effects, but we also deal with some social problems and even problems in our personal relationships. It's very difficult to love somebody who's struggling with an addiction. And even if you're deep in your addiction and you have somebody, maybe a sibling or a best friend that loves and cares about you, over time, your addiction is going to take a toll on them. And they'll have to do the most difficult thing that they'd ever have to do, which is to let you go, because otherwise that addiction is going to start to take a toll on them as well and affect their well-being. People don't generally go this in-depth when talking about using these substances, but I think it's really important to really discuss in-depth kind of everything that can happen from using. And so knowing this, why do people continue to use? Very few people understand the risks of using, because we're taught to not use drugs, but we're not taught why to not use drugs. And even if we do know, there are some people who just generally don't care about the risks. Of course, they eventually start caring when they start to get physically sick or develop a mental illness from that substance they're using. Now, so many people, especially teens, will go into it with the mindset that, oh, it's not going to happen to me. Addiction's not going to happen to me. No one ever warns you about the risk of developing an addiction, especially if that person is trying to pass you a bottle or a pipe or a pill or a joint, because it makes them feel better about themselves knowing that they're roping you into doing the unhealthy, responsible thing with them. Even though they know it's dangerous, they'll feel better about doing it if you're doing it along with them. And this is kind of why peer pressure is such a big problem as well. Pharmaceuticals as well. Let's say you go to a doctor and they prescribe something to you. That doesn't mean we let our guard down, because guess what? Some medicines that doctors prescribe, things like morphine or Xanax or Adderall, are very high risk, not just for physical and mental health damage, but also for addiction. And so this is why your doctor or your pharmacist is going to stress that you follow the dose and don't go beyond what the dose is specifying. Even drugs that seem harmless, over-the-counter drugs like Tylenol or Robitussin or cough syrup or Advil, these things do have compounds in them that could potentially be very dangerous if misused. Even something as relatively harmless as cannabis can cause a whole bunch of unpleasant and even dangerous side effects, physical and mental, if somebody's misusing it or maybe using it frequently or using it daily. And so now we're going to run into a couple of healthier alternatives, things that can give you a natural boost of those happy hormones. Of course, it's not going to be as intense as using a substance, because it's not an artificial high and it's not boosting it to the point where your body's ramping up hormone production. That's good. That's healthy. That's what we want. We don't want to get to a point where we can't feel anything unless we have a whole bunch of drugs in our system. That just gets miserable very quickly. And so sports would be the first things. Most physical activity is going to trigger the release of endorphins and dopamine and all these happy chemicals. And so joining a sports league, for whether it's bowling or basketball or hockey or soccer or basketball, or why do I have basketball twice? No, it's baseball and basketball and volleyball. And there's also leagues for things like water polo or maybe frisbee or maybe even cornhole, or if you like to play pool, billiards. There's going to be leagues for that as well. The reason I say leagues is because being social with other people is also going to make us feel great about ourselves, and it'll probably make us feel better about joining the sports league if we're able to connect with the people on the team. Adventuring is another great way to get that natural high off of life. Going to a beach or a lake with your friends, or swimming, or hiking, horseback riding, even biking through a nature trail is going to be something that you'll enjoy. If there's a lake or a pond or a beach next to you, snorkeling is very fun. You get to swim with the fishes. You can do courses like a ropes course or a Tough Mudder course. I would recommend looking those up. They look really fun. I haven't personally tried it, but it does look super fun. Go-karting is really fun. Going to museums, art exhibits, science centers, learning something new about the planet, or going to a farm or zoo and learning something new about the creatures that inhabit this planet with us. The social alternatives are always going to be your best bet. Whether you join a fitness class, or you volunteer at a homeless shelter, or you host a gaming tournament with your friends, or even calling a friend and talking and saying, hey, how are you? These are things that are going to give us a little spike in those happy hormones, and it's always nice to have people around us to have a good support system. So these are also good as well. And some mental exercises are going to also help you boost a lot of those happy hormones and improve your brain health as well. And so the more we exercise our mind with word puzzles or math puzzles, or learning new things, learning new languages, even something as simple as meditation, these are all going to be great for our mental health. And lastly, if we are just, we're dealing with some chronic physical pain and we'd like to mitigate those symptoms, exercise is also going to help. Not weightlifting. You don't want to be doing squats when your back is hurting, but things like yoga, gentle stretching, or even exercises in the pool can be great for alleviating pain. Meditation helps relax the mind, as we discussed. Good sleeping habits are important, because the more we sleep, the more opportunity our body has to improve our physical health and to repair itself. Fiber-rich foods are going to reduce inflammation. If you have inflammation in a certain part of your body, a warm compress. If you have inflammation, a cold compress. So a bag of ice is going to reduce that inflammation. If it's sore and it's not inflammation, a warm compress is going to help to increase blood flow to that area so that it can repair itself. I apologize for the confusion. as I talked about, you want to have some kind of social life. You want to build relationships with people who are going to support you through difficult moments, through physical pain. Maybe you're in a physical therapy group with a bunch of people and you guys all have similar pain symptoms. And so you kind of get along with that. And now you have a new group of friends. I just read this online. Turmeric root is supposed to reduce inflammation. You can try that. Acupuncture is interesting, even though science hasn't exactly proven how it works. We do know that it works on certain pressure points in the body to help alleviate pain. And so you could try acupuncture from a certified acupuncture specialist, or just a massage day or a spa day for yourself is going to help you kind of unwind and alleviate some of that pain. Now, some of these in these lists might not seem interesting to you because, as I said before, all of us are different. And so our ideas of fun activities is going to be different. But especially because you're young, you could potentially enjoy some of these activities and you could learn something new. You could develop a new skill, and that's awesome. There are so many different things that you can do besides lighting up or drinking or popping a pill. And so I hope the lists that I gave you have given you some ideas for natural alternatives to getting high. At the end of the day, when we try and learn new things, we find that it's an awesome, wonderful experience. And that increases our sense of self-worth and accomplishment. And so if you'd like to reach out to us for any resources, any more fun activities that you can do to take your mind off of that curiosity to try substances, our phone number is 888-315-5242, or you can email us at info@lahc.org just for more resources or just to chat. And these are some other resources. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration are, or it's not ours, but a 24/7 free teen crisis text line, and the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids. I hope you all have a fantastic weekend. Thank you again for tuning in, and I will see you next week. Take care.